Hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. My name is Stephen Deslongchamps.
I'm Leo Giampietro.
And I'm Aidan Del Fava.
And today we are interviewing Roland Cafaro. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
So first, Leo is going to start us off and ask some questions.
All
All right, we're going to start with your early life here. We're just going to go right off the bat. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Elm Grove, Wisconsin, although I was born in Waukesha, but moved to Elm Grove when I was 9 months old.
From your childhood, what was Elm Grove like?
You know, Elm Grove was sort of the edge of the empire, as it were. There was, everything sort of stopped. Elm Grove, Brookfield, and then there was a big gap between Waukesha. Like everything that you know out on Blue Mound Road, going out that way, was just farm fields. So Brookfield Square was brand new. That was like how crazy it was back then.
And all this development, did that occur while you were there or later after you had moved out?
It started while I was there. I remember that they were kind of, slowly adding and filling in. But Blue Mound Road was sort of a corridor out to Waukesha, which was its own distinct entity. Like when you said you were from Waukesha, that was being from a completely different place than being from Milwaukee. Not so anymore, but back then, absolutely.
When you were younger, what did Elm Grove look like?
So Elm Grove at that time, I think it had pretty much been fully developed. It's small. It was only like 1 mile by 1 mile. So I think even by the mid-'60s, it was largely developed out. So it didn't change all that much. But I went to St. Mary's in Elm Grove, which I think, Leo, you went to as well. But so the school was going through changes. There was still the original school building that I went through classes in 1st through 4th grade. It's no longer there, but that was like a brick building that had been there for a long time. It was pretty old. So the school went through a lot of changes. The town itself, or the village, was just hordes of young families with just hordes of kids. I mean, I just remember there, St. Mary's at that time, when I first started, 10 school buses would take kids like home, and and there were tons of walkers and bike riders too. It was just, there were a lot of kids. It slowly sort of depleted over the years, but that was kind of the end of the baby boom, so there were a lot of kids going to school there. But Elm Grove itself still hasn't really changed all that much.
So the houses were all unique then? They weren't like cookie cutters?
No, that is true. I mean, growing up, there were subdivisions where, it was a lot of ranches and things like that, but it was not like tract development that you would see, out in California or out west, where it's the same building replicated over and over. The homes were very different from one another, but I would definitely say we lived in 2 different homes. The first one was a 1-floor ranch house, and that's what the neighborhood was all around us. If you had an upstairs, I remember being like, whoa, they have an upstairs, that's kind of cool, Then when we moved to a house with an upstairs, like, oh, that's kind of interesting, we had that.
So where did you live in Elm Grove?
Specifically, we lived in the neighborhood called Carolyn Heights. So it was just past 124th Street. That was the first. I lived there till I think I was in, till I was in 4th grade. And then we moved west of the Elm Grove Park. The railroad tracks sort of bisect Elm Grove. So we moved to the west side of the tracks in a neighborhood called, I can't remember what it's called. That's crazy. But that neighborhood, whatever they called it, right. They still call it that. And there the homes were a little larger. Every house had 2 floors, but everything was built by and large in the 60s. I think probably from the late 50s to 1970, Elm Grove went up and was done.
So you talk about like these separations of cities between Elm Grove and Wauwatosa, and even within Elm Grove. Did these cause any fun like rivalries through like sports or otherwise?
And it's funny you say that. There definitely was. I mean, there were three schools in Elm Grove. One Catholic, two public. And then eventually, by the time I came to high school, there was only one public school. But there were the Catholic kids, and then there were the public school kids. And I only knew the public school kids because they would come to the Catholic school for CCD, and we'd, kind of look and see on Monday mornings that our desks had been, sort of pilfered or rifled through. Not in a bad way, but it's just like, what's going on? But so we would only come across those kids in summertime rec sports, because back then everything was Catholic League basketball, Catholic League football, Catholic League softball. We didn't play baseball really through the schools. It was softball. And then you would play rec league, Little League baseball, and that was done through the community. And that was really the only time that you kind of met the kids that went to public schools. So there were these absolute separations. And growing up, you're still a kid, so your life is sort of dictated by how far you can ride a bike. So it wasn't that I didn't know kids in Wauwatosa or Brookfield, but I really didn't until you kind of got to high school. And even then, because you grew up in this Catholic world, I always associated them, not that they were from Wauwatosa or Brookfield, it was just what parish they went to. So, did you go to St. Joe's? Did you go to Christ King? Did you go to St. Jude? So it was,
right.
That was always how it worked out.
And going back, you said you lived in two houses when
Right.
you were younger. What was the first house like in Carolyn Hills?
In Carolyn Heights, the first house, my grandmother lived with us. And I remember there were 4 bedrooms, but Grandma took one, Mom and Dad took the other, and then there were 5 kids in the other 2 bedrooms. And so my 3 sisters were in one room, and I was in the room with my older brother. And my older brother, at the time, he was 8 years older than me, which doesn't sound like a big difference now, but I was in 1st grade when he was a freshman in high school, and I was in 4th grade when he was graduating high school, 5th grade when he went away to college. That's just a world of difference. But so that's how I grew up. Until I didn't have my own room until my brother went away to college. And my brother never had I shouldn't say that. He had his own room for a little bit, but generally didn't until he went away to college, which is kind of crazy.
And what was the second house like?
Second house was bigger. I think Mom and Dad had gotten a little nuts, having kids just crawling all over them. And so we moved to a house that had more space in a neighborhood that had fewer kids. The first neighborhood really was just polluted with children. It was just, it was awesome. I mean, we played, especially in the summer, it was kind of free reign. Kids like Lord of the Flies, who were just sort of released, and we would go out and we'd play until nighttime, and then just called to come in. We had I would say that was like the biggest difference between my childhood and I would say my children's childhood, is it was far less structured. We didn't have organized sports to go to. We didn't have anything. It was kind of like you might have taken a swimming lesson early in the morning at the public pool, and then it was, well, you're on your own till dinner, and then after dinner, you're on your own till you go to bed. There wasn't TV to watch. I mean, there was, but there were 3 channels, and Grandma was watching it most of the time. So we were kind of out and about doing our own things, which was great because you played, you made up games, sports, and so in that regard, there were kids in the neighborhood that went to public school. So I will say that I knew public school kids that lived in my neighborhood, but I didn't know any wider variant of public school kids.
So people sometimes talk about, coming home when the street lights turn on. Did you have any markers or anything you specifically remember about your childhood that kind of brought you home?
So we didn't have street lights, which was funny. We didn't have sidewalks. There was a time during the summer, every kid went out and played kick the can at night. It was and that was all summer long. And you play in the dark, and then eventually someone's parent would holler for that one to go home, and then we kind of would sort of start peeling off and go home. But there was no, bell ringing or anything like that. The older kids would stay out. The younger kids would kind of go in. Mm-hmm. That was the biggest thing about when we left that neighborhood and went to a neighborhood where there were no kids. I like, what happened to all the kids?
Yeah.
And luckily I had there were a couple that were nearby, but it wasn't the same where you would just, if a kid just walked out on the street, it was like 5 other kids would just show up. It was like magnetism that pulled kids out. And if you had a ball or something, I mean, forget about it. A game was happening. So it was not so much in the second house.
Absolutely.
And you talked about today how there's more structure to kids' lives these days, and there was little structure to kids' lives in your days.
Right.
Like, what were some of the things you would do without that structure?
Well, without the structure, there were good things. You get creative. Build forts in the woods. Go out, do stuff. Probably bad things too. Blowing up stuff. I hate to say it, but you went through a phase in life when we became like minor pyrotechnic experts. If there were firecrackers to be found, you were sticking it in something and kind of watching it detonate. I don't think my kids have ever done. Well, now that I know it, they probably have, but
right. Maybe they were just good at hiding it.
Right. Yeah. So we kind of did that. It wasn't like we were up to no good. It wasn't like we were knocking over gas stations or anything like that. But it was just there was just very little supervision. So you could go over to someone's house and play. And I definitely remember being young. And this is a different. Like, I would never let my first grader or second grader just walk down the street all by themselves and go somewhere else. We would always take them. With me, it was door open, and I'm going to Klingbeil's house, and that was on the other side of the neighborhood in second grade, and I'd be there till whenever. I mean, typically you get fed at the other person's house. I had friends that would come over to our house. We had sugared cereal. A lot of my friends' parents wouldn't let them eat, so my friends would come over, I think, for sugared cereal. So they would eat it like they'd never eaten before. So.
And with the unsupervision that there was during the day, what are your favorite memories from those times?
To me, it was just I honestly remember the nighttime, kick the can, hide and seek. That was just like the coolest thing to me. Playing in the dark with just tons of kids. That was really cool. And then when you would walk to school, that was the other thing. Because at that house we walked to school. And it was just amazing how many kids walked to school. It was just like the Pied Piper was taking kids off in the morning to go to class. It was really kind of crazy. So that's what I remember, and it being really kind of neat in that regard.
So, kind of politically during that time period, the war, I believe, was at around the end of the Vietnam War, yeah. And the Apollo 13 rocket and things like that. Were you at all aware of these things as a kid?
So, that's funny you say that. I do. I remember the summer of '69, so I was only 4 years old, and I have a vague recollection of standing around a black and white TV when the moon landing happened. I don't remember specifically watching it happen or unfold, but I remember everyone standing around with that. I definitely remember that. I remember going with my dad to Serb Hall during the '72 elections. And I saw Hubert Humphrey and McGovern in person at Serb Hall. So I definitely recall that. I recall when Nixon resigned, so I think that was 73, 74. And I do have this recollection of the end of the Vietnam War, because I remember church bells ringing. I remember I have an actual vivid memory of standing in our back door at our first house, and all the church bells were ringing. Now, I might be conflating that with some other memory, but I remember asking my mom, why are all the bells ringing? And I do remember her saying because the war had ended, but I didn't really know what that was all about. But I definitely remember I remember the day that Nixon resigned. I have no idea why a kid would remember that, but I definitely remember that. So I do have a kind of political thing. I was not cognizant of what was going on in the world politically at all. You know, all I knew is, you know, I do remember having a spacesuit as a snowsuit. So clearly the moon landing and all that stuff, it was obviously in the popular zeitgeist. So I mean, you know, you're dressing up your kids as astronauts, and I love it. I mean, in fact, there's a Christmas picture of me in a snowsuit, and they tried to get it off of me, and I was like, please keep me in the spacesuit. I bought it, and so they kept me in it, and I'm pretty angry in the picture. Everyone else is smiling in the Christmas picture, but I'm the little angry spaceman right in the middle of the picture.
Well, if you don't mind, I think we would like to include that picture at the end of the interview, and kind of like a slideshow of the pictures you might mention along the way.
Sure, yeah. Oh, I have it. Yeah. Little
all right, good to know.
So, you mentioned like hordes of kids also, and did they all go and you went to St. Mary's, would they all go to St. Mary's, or a majority of them go to St. Mary's?
You know, my recollection, and in fact, now that you're pressing me on this, I think the majority of the kids in my neighborhood were public school kids in my neighborhood. But outside of that, I mean, my world was during the school year, it was, you know, you're hanging out with the kids I went to St. Mary's with, because then you'd have, you know, extracurricular stuff with them. And but in my neighborhood, there were very few that went to St. Mary's. I used to be able to go around. I could go through every house. It was a circle subdivision, and every house on both sides had at least 4 kids. There were a couple families with 9 and 10 kids.
Wow.
And so it was just, it was like the Wizard of Oz at some point. So I remember seeing movies of Halloween that my parents had taken, and it was just a sea of children coming up. I mean, you probably need a fire hose to keep them off the walls, but it was crazy.
And for St. Mary's, you described it like as a brick building. What were like school days like there?
We went to Mass 4 days a week. Definitely 3. Actually, it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 1 year, and Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Fridays were always all school masses. So you always had Mass. And then, you know, when you were younger, I do remember this, you had 3 recesses. That was a hard thing about coming to high school. Like no more recess.
Yeah, no, it's been hard for us to believe.
I mean, you create your own recess, but the lunchroom was recess here. But it was, So the days were kind of built around. I remember when I was little, it was recess and lunch, and then when you got a little older, you got fewer recesses. But yeah, you know, it was a typical day. You were out of there. It's just funny because I remember a school day was 8 o'clock. We'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, and classes were done by 2:30. And I remember at that time, 2:30, couldn't come early enough. You know, it's like, this day is brutal. It's so long. And you know, now you think being done at 2:30. You know, I don't know. What do you guys? Are you done at 3:05 here still, or
3:10?
3:10.
Mm-hmm.
I've added a whole 5 days or 5 minutes to the school day. Because I do remember coming here, and when the day went to 3:05 initially, I'm like, 3:05, that's forever. Yeah.
It felt like forever when we came here. You described recess. Well, what games would you play at recess?
Football, kill the carrier, just all the boys. The boys went in one place, girls went in the other. I don't know what the girls did. The boys, it was kickball, football, and then at just some point, just kill the carrier, which was give you a ball and you would run until someone tackled you. And it was full-on tackle on a concrete asphalt thing. And it felt like there was nobody policing it. I'm sure that's not the case. But I remember it was just full-on tackling, running around. I think every week I would come home with a hole in my pants, and every boy had patches on their knees.
Oh yeah.
Because that was just you were just shredding your pants from recess, and we would have like epic games, like especially for football. Like you'd start the first recess, and then you'd continue the second recess, and go to the third recess. We didn't carry it over from day to day, but yeah, and it was. Yeah, that was very fun. But it was all up to us. There was no teacher out there saying do this, do that. I don't really recall much of the way of skirmishes on the playground. I'm sure there were, but yeah, it was just kind of a free for all. When the doors opened, you're like, wow. Yeah, you'd run out there. But what I love, on the asphalt. I mean, in fact, we were told to stay off the grass field. That's how, yeah. And our softball diamond was on the asphalt. All the basketball courts on the asphalt. The football field was on the asphalt. And like painted out. Yeah.
Do you have any scars in particular that you got playing Kill the Carrier?
I still have a scar from the here playing pond hockey with a friend from, I still remember, it was 1980, because 1980 was the year that the U.S. Olympic team won the gold medal in ice hockey in Lake Placid. And I remember watching those games, and then going over to the pond in Elm Grove with my friend Mark Swinkowski, and the two of us just playing one-on-one hockey under one light, and we were both wearing Packer helmets. I don't know, no other pads, but we would beat up on one another. But he took actually before we started wearing, what precipitated us wearing helmets is I took a slap shot right to the face, and my tooth went through my lip.
Oh.
And I remember like blowing like this and air just going just like that. And so I still have that. I still have that scar. And actually, now that I take it, I have a scar over here from I needed stitches. I got slipped on the ice during the playground at St. Mary's in like second grade. I remember going for stitches for that. Wow, I had not thought about that in forever. Yeah.
What were like your good friends at St. Mary's like?
You know, we were peas in a pod, and we've had reunions now. So I'm 44 years out of grade school, and we have had a couple reunions, and you still see those people, and you remember them as if time stood still. There are very few people in your life but you get to share this very unique experience of going to that school and this community at that time with those teachers, and it defines you. So we were very close, and a number of them still not as close as I'd like to think that we are, but I think like 7 or 8 of us got together just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a couple I hadn't seen in 20 years.
Wow.
And it's like, look at us, you know, we're still doing we were still, yeah, the I don't know, screwballs that we were back then.
I sound like a broken record here with my phrasing, but what were the teachers at SMV like? You know,
the teachers, so I remember we had a lot of nuns, and so the nuns were pretty strict. I had a sister Philanilla, a sister Cladulfa. I love these names. They sound like diseases that should be treated with like antibiotics or something. But
were these chosen names?
I have no idea. I don't know what a Sedella or a Cladulfa or a Philanilla is, but they were our nuns, and Sister Philanilla she was the quintessential old Catholic nun. I think like the Sisters of Perpetual Revenge or something like that. Yeah. If you wrote with the left hand, she would take the pencil out.
Really?
The lefties, righty. She would yell at you. There were a couple kids she would let go to the bathroom, and they ended up, going to the bathroom, and it was like, people were terrified of Sister Philanilla. I was, and luckily I didn't have her. But then, so there were a lot of nuns, and then when you got a little older, we had more lay teachers, and you started taking more science classes and stuff. But it was very regimented, at least as far as like catechism and stuff like that. So when you got here, when all of a sudden there was more questioning you, like I felt like you went from being a child to not being a child when you came here, because you suddenly earned a measure of respect from the teachers. Not to say that there weren't teachers here that, you know, would put you in your place, but it was different. There was definitely, you know, some strictness. The Monsignor, we had a Monsignor who ran the parish, and he might as well have been, you know, the Pope. And he ran everything. When he walked through the hallways, kids separated. But we had 3 priests throughout my whole time there. And if the priests, I definitely remember this, there was, if the priests came out on the playground, the young ones, the kids flocked to them. It was, really? I still remember that. And like, it was wild. Like, oh, the priest is out here. And it was not Monsignor Emenegger. No, and people they ran away from him. Yeah.
So when talking about the nuns that used to teach you, you made a kind of slapping gesture with a ruler.
Yeah, Sister Villanella. She honestly did that. She would thwap you with a ruler. There, no question.
And
it was
what for? Like talking aloud in class, not doing your homework,
bad penmanship, whatever it was. It was, yeah. She was about 1,000 years old too. So I think that she was from a different time when that was allowed. But yeah, they wore the full habit, and then the younger nuns, when I got up there, then they definitely wore habits, but not like, you know, the full thing. And then I would walk over to the convent. I took piano lessons, and then after school, as if it wasn't enough to be in school with the nuns, and I had to go take piano lessons from the nuns, and I'd have to go over to the convent and wait in a room while my sister took her piano lesson first, and I was waiting, and I could hear the nun kind of yelling at her, and it was like waiting for my own execution, because I knew that I was going to be way worse than her. And and that convent is still there, although now it's being converted into housing. But yeah, and I thought every community had a convent. I thought every community, you know, had a Monsignor Emenegger. Not so, but yeah, that was, you know, as a kid, that's all you knew.
I feel like the slapping of the wrists, if you're writing left-handed, I feel like that's more like oppressive dictatorship than an actual like classroom environment there.
Well, definitely. I mean, the nuns, the old ones, and like I said, they had been violating some laws by keeping them working, but it was, they seemed really old, and they just had a different way about it. But I will say that sort of created a culture that Catholic school kids had. I mean, we could all, you know, the fear of the nun is
powerful.
Maybe it's overwrought, but it is. There's still those like, you know, you see a picture of Sister Villanella. Yeah, that's kind of.
So you talked about taking piano lessons. Is that something you stuck with throughout the years, or? So
I still play piano to this day, and thank God, I love it. But my parents made me take it, and from 4th grade to 8th grade, and I pleaded like crazy to please don't make me take piano, and I didn't realize I was pretty good at it, and until I was done. And then now it's like one of the greatest gifts I've ever had, because I really do enjoy playing, and I would have never had it. But there was a discipline. I mean, I had a sister, Cecilia, and she might have been 800 years old when she taught me. But she would, you learned out of fear. I mean, it was, yeah. But it was, yeah, it was definitely something I'm glad. And so I still, you know, my dad, who's 93, still lives in that second house that I grew up in. And so we're out there a lot. And drive past that convent, and I can still look at that window, which is still there, and be like, that was the window that I took my piano lesson in, and that was the window where I was waiting. It was like a dead man walking, just waiting. And she'd say, "Oh, that was the berries." She would always say that, and I had no idea what that meant. That was the berries.
Was it good or
No,
bad?
it was bad, but I don't know how it was bad. Because I'm like, I like berries. I don't know, that seems like a pretty good thing. But, oh, that was the berries. She would say that a lot.
I can attest to your piano playing skills because I've seen you firsthand at Christmas parties at Schlitzky's playing Vince Guaraldi on the piano in the bar room, which very good. It sounded like right from the album, which is great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Actually, your mom got me all the Vince Guaraldi music. So
That is true.
yeah, so every year I pull the music out. I'm like, all right, because I can't remember it anymore. That's the one bad thing of aging is when you're young, you learn something and you play it, and when you get old, if it's not right in front of you, you can't play it.
This is going way back to you're talking about extracurriculars earlier. What, sports did you play in grade school?
So football, basketball, and softball was through the school. And then baseball was summer through the parks. And so what was funny, and I thought about this, like the difference between today and back then. Even back then, starting in 4th grade, you had to try out for the team. And there were cuts. I mean, it was like right away, like you're on it or you're not on it. There was, and I remember the first year getting cut. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't, and it's funny now, it's just like we have all the kids and everyone does that, who's getting equal time. And even if you were on the team, it was like starting right back then. There was no guarantee you were going to play. I mean, it was just like such a different thing. But then football, it was great. We had, football was an absolute gas, and I loved it. We had 2 coaches that had played professional football, so that really helped.
Oh wow!
There was an organization and a regimen to playing football there, but it was neat. You played only other Catholic schools that all had 40 guys on a team, and it was 7th and 8th grade. You couldn't play football. It was a 7th and 8th grade joint league, and you could start in 6th grade if your parents would let you. My parents wouldn't, so I started in 7th grade. Mm-hmm. But whereas now, that's the other thing. I mean, you see some kids starting playing football like in 3rd grade. It's some crazy, and baseball. Like I said, we never faced overhand baseball. I love this. So we played in an organized league out in Brookfield, all these teams, but no uniforms. The uniform was blue jeans, and you got one shirt, the whole league. It was green on one side and yellow on the other. So when you'd show up, you're like, oh, we're the green team, you're the yellow team. And then the next night, you'd be the yellow versus white. Nobody wore cleats. There were no batting gloves. There were no parents in the stands. I mean, it was, and I remember we played in the evening, and it was, you would go to your game. I didn't have like a uniform until 7th grade, and then you started playing more organized baseball. Like in proper, I shouldn't say proper league because it was a league before, but yeah, now you see kids, showing up for Pee Wee baseball today, and they've got all this stuff.
All their Oakleys.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, what is that? Where's the blue jeans? I just want to put blue jeans on and let them go out.
So for baseball, were games scheduled, and then just the rest, like you're just on your own?
Yeah. So you'd have one game, maybe 2 games a week, and that was it. And then the rest of the time, and I remember having a few practices, like a dad would run a practice, but it wasn't really organized. There was one dad who, you can say he drew the short straw, but he really didn't because he coached us a lot. He was great, Mr. Dorr. And, but yeah, it was, 1 or 2 nights a week. But during the summer, it was, man, you were just on your own. It was, eat breakfast, eat my sugared cereal.
Lucky.
Run around the neighborhood, yeah.
So we're going to kind of move on here to high school years.
Right.
What was the transition like from St. Mary's to Marquette High?
So, yeah, a world of difference. I mean, obviously, going from co-ed to not co-ed, that was like, whoa, that's weird, there are no girls here. I mean, you quickly adjust to that. It was academically more rigorous, but also much more invigorating. Like sitting down in the lunchroom and talking with a teacher, whether it be a Jesuit or a lay, like sitting down and actually talking. I'm like, whoa, wow, this is wild. Like, we're having a conversation. They're looking at me as an adult. I mean, it was great. And to this day, my closest friends are still friends that I met here. Yeah, it was pretty nice.
And you mentioned more religious order teachers. Mm-hmm. What like effect did that have on your life as a whole, having religious teachers throughout your childhood?
Well, so I mean, I loved it, and so much so that, I mean, having religious teachers, we ended up sending our kids to Catholic schools because it was a very positive influence. But such a difference going from diocesan grade school to a Jesuit high school. We're at the diocesan school, you're little, and so you're just told, the catechism, this is the way it is, this is the way it is, this is the way it is. And when you got here, it was like, well, let's talk about the why that's the way it is, and let's explore. And it was just like, it was as if you're allowing your brain to sort of open up more, and that was one of the things that was really eye-opening about that. And for me, it launched out because I ended up going to a Jesuit university as well, and so it was just kind of a carryover of that same very open, creative learning atmosphere. But what I loved too was the element of spirituality, not necessarily tied to the rigor of the catechism, and that was that was pretty empowering. That was pretty neat. Yeah, I like that a lot.
So three Catholic schools in a row. Did you ever consider the priesthood or the seminary?
I did, and then I started dating girls, and then I'm like, that was it. I do remember. It's like, I don't know who's going to watch this, but I remember Father Suzama leaning on me to go up to to visit the novitiate in St. Paul, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So, yeah. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And there were the class ahead of us from Marquette High had 3 guys who ended up being Jesuits. So yeah, the class of '83 was always way better than us. So we were kind of the. In fact, I would have said this. The mantra that the administration had for our class is, "Why can't you be more like the class before you?" We were kind of the lugheads of the school at the time.
So I'm sure, like, over the last few years with, like, Joe, Nick, and Andrew attending Marquette, you get, like, a general feel for the atmosphere here today. Mm-hmm. What was the atmosphere here at Marquette like back then?
I really get the sense that not a lot has changed in the atmosphere. Because I see in my sons the same core friends that I had, the same experiences that I had. I think that there is this continuity of the experience here, which is phenomenal. I'm sure a lot has changed too. It has to have changed, yeah. I had someone. This was years ago. I didn't really know that well, and he was older, but he just stopped me. He's like, "Mr. Cafaro." I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Can I ask you something?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Did you go to Catholic school?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "I can tell." And I didn't really know what it meant, but once you have kids, and then you see the other kids, like, oh yeah, there's kind of a thread of continuity in how you guys are and how I was.
I'd say in terms of the staff today, there are a lot more. The majority of staff is lay people. Back then, was it like Jesuits and scholastic and like few lay people?
There were a lot of lay people, but there were far more Jesuits and scholastics. And the scholastics were cool because they were young, and and they were Mister. They weren't Father, and you would talk with them, and you for some reason I really liked those the scholastic. I don't know why that would be, but there was definitely a bonding. Maybe it's just because they were younger, but some of the scholastics were pretty cool. And then you'd find out, those scholastics that were here. I mean, one ended up going on to be the president at the university that I was at. I mean, he wasn't president when I was there, but he did that. Like, I remember back when he was just a mister way back in the day, and so yeah, it was definitely cool.
So going back a little bit, you guys, you said you were kind of the blockhead grade, especially compared to the one ahead of you.
Yes.
Are there any blockhead stories that you remember from high school?
Well, I always point this out. This is like epitomizes the difference between our class and the class before. The class before, they would do senior pranks, and I think you guys still do senior pranks. But, so the senior prank happened, and the class ahead of us, for their senior prank, they got access to the building, and they literally sodded the faculty lounge and made a golf course. They moved all the furniture out, put grass in, put golf cups in, and they turned it into a golf course. The administration loved it. It was in USA Today, like these creative kids. And so they were like, well, how do we make it better? And what we did is we stole probably 1.5 tons of sand from Bradford Beach and brought it in, and we turned the blue and gold room into a beach. And nobody was happy about that. Nobody was happy about that. We got, a lot of people got
1.5 tons. How'd you move
I will tell you,
it?
it was a lot of pickup trucks in the middle of the night, and it would. In my mind's eye, I remember walking in like, this is so cool, because guys were in Hawaiian shirts and glasses, and the mister who was the vice principal at the time, and he was a scholastic, he was like, Cafaro. And I'm like, huh. So we all got home.
Yeah, I'm sure that was like highly illegal.
It was illegal, and then just the mess of all the sand and having to get it out of the blue and gold room. Yeah, it was. So that sort of typified the difference between us and them. And the class ahead of us, everyone was great. We were just the class guys were getting in trouble, left and right.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about going to Bradford. This is still in the context, but you're going to Bradford Beach. Assume you go through downtown to get there. What was like downtown Milwaukee like at the time?
It's funny. I don't really recall. You just kind of sort of went through it, because we didn't have any, with the exception of the lakefront. We're too young to have any knowledge of where to go downtown. People didn't really live downtown then like they do now, at least in apartments. There are definitely neighborhoods in near downtown and high schools downtown. There's Cathedral High School downtown, St. John and Tita. But it wasn't, so that aspect was different. Downtown was very different. But in some ways, I always felt like we were downtown, even though we weren't. 35th Street's pretty far west, but I had no idea where things were. It wasn't until I was older and was living down there, and I'd be like, oh, that's where that was? Like, I didn't know that's where that was. Like, like your parents would drop you off someplace. I'm like, oh. I remember I was briefly in a drum corps, and we would practice, the drum corps would practice at Cathedral Square. And I remember being dropped off at Cathedral Square, but I didn't know it was Cathedral Square at the time, but I remember the cathedral, the church, and I remember seeing what was then the first Wisconsin building, which was the only tall building in the city. And like, wow, where am I? I'm in the middle of a city. If you had said go home, I'd be like, well, I'm done. I might as well have been in Portugal. I had absolutely no idea where I was. So that's funny how you grow. But yeah, the city changed a lot. I never had fear, and maybe that's just a naivete. I was not aware of the housing issues that the city had. I was never really cognizant of the segregation that the city has and had then. you're still a kid, in some ways. And so when they said, meet me at Bradford Beach to get a bunch of sand, that's where you'd go. But in the summer times, as we got older, and that's where we would kind of congregate at the lakefront, as tons of people now from other schools, and then like guys from that high school at this part of the lakefront, guys were at that part of the lakefront, and then you just hang out. I remember my dad asking me, like, where are you going? I'm like, the lakefront. What are you doing? Hanging out. What do you do? I don't know, just hang out. And he's like, do you need money? I'm like, I got it. I had like $2. Like, I've got $2, I'm fine. And it's like, you wouldn't, it was funny. Not that it was simpler, but you just, I don't know, you just didn't know. You were naive in some ways.
So you talked about like gathering at the lakefront and like around the city. If I'm correct, the Brewers were in the 1982 World Series when you were in high school.
That was huge. Yeah, the Brewers in the World Series. So I remember. So I do. I remember the Bucks winning the only vaguely. I actually more remember them losing the next year to the Celtics. I actually recall that in the NBA championship. But the Brewers in 1982, that was like a complete. That was like awesome, because that was a culmination of a few years. The Brewers were getting better and better and better, and but then when they made it to the World Series, and then I was in high school, and you could see the stadium here, and the Goodyear blimp was flying over going to games. Like, this is amazing, this, and the whole city came together. And in some ways, I say it was kind of like the Bucks winning the championship just a couple of years ago. That was one of these city unifying events that. It didn't matter where you lived, what you did, how much you made. You were a Brewer fan, and that was just like, really, that was really exciting. And then, when they won the AL championship, you just went to Wisconsin Avenue. For some reason, Wisconsin Avenue was, and that was that way when the Braves won it in '57. But you just go to Wisconsin Avenue and you just go up and down Wisconsin Avenue. I guess people are simple. We just like to go to a place and congregate. But yeah, so I remember doing that when we won the AL championship.
And were there any other times you remember going to Wisconsin Avenue?
When I was older, when the Packers won the Super Bowl in '96-'97 season, so I didn't make it actually to Wisconsin Avenue, but after they won, and I was with friends, like, we're going downtown, and just congregated, high five people. I do remember Marquette High basketball winning the state championship, which we did a lot back then, especially when I was there. But I remember it was my junior year, we won state, and I was with my friends, and it was the first time you were driving, and we left the arena, and it's getting kind of warm because it's springtime. And you're just driving around downtown with the windows open and you're honking your horn. I don't think anyone else in the city really cared, but for us, that was, it was akin to the Brewers winning. Like, we're in the city, we're honking our horns, we're doing something. And
yeah.
So that was neat.
What was like on Wisconsin Avenue that made it such like a big destination?
For me, I don't have any recollection of anything specifically being on Wisconsin Avenue. But Wisconsin Avenue was always the main thoroughfare of the city. I mean, that's the east-west dividing line. It's almost like the north-south dividing line too, and so, or not east-west, it's the east-west corridor. But it was Wisconsin Avenue. So it was kind of cool that our school was on Wisconsin Avenue. It's like, oh, we're right in the thick of it. But yeah, I don't know.
You talked about state championships for Marquette. Like, do you remember like any other ones? Because I'm pretty sure like we won football a couple times.
I was on the football team when we won the state championship. That's still one of those memories. That was pretty darn fun. I enjoyed that a lot. So we won. Soccer won it every year back then. I mean, soccer wasn't as widespread as it is now, but they won it all 4 years there. We won basketball. I want to say we won basketball all 4 years when I was here. It was just a sense of like it was cool to be at a school that won stuff. And back then, I think, so there were two, the private school conference, WISA, WISAA, and WIAA, which was the public schools. And you would only play a public school in obviously non-conference games, but you had separate state champions. And there were people who say, oh, well, Marquette won all those because you were in WISA and not WIAA. But we really did like to think that whenever we played public schools, we were better than them. And I do think that we were, because back then, the school was really drawing from a big cross-section around. And not to say that it doesn't, but like the Arrowheads of the world is like big monstrous schools with huge athletic facilities. They did, I mean, back when playing football, it was the Cudahy Packers. Those are the guys, like, look out for them. They're pretty good. But everyone else, it was, and maybe Milwaukee Tech, that was pretty good. Bradley Tech now. Yeah, that's the other thing. Schools changing names.
Yeah.
I still revert to the old school names. Like, where's that? And then they're like, oh, that's South Division. I'm like, oh, South Division. Okay, I know where that is.
And do you remember any of these, like, any of the times you would play the public schools? And, like, were these games, like, typically bigger or smaller than the in-conference games?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think they were bigger. I mean, we always took, like, pride, like, we got to beat these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we played in the Metro Conference then, it was Pius and Thomas More, Catholic Memorial, but like Pius and Thomas More, ooh, those games, those were heated. Catholic Memorial too, but Pius and Thomas More, those were, and it's like, to me, I see now, they're in smaller conferences or smaller state divisions. I was like, oh, I miss the days of those old things. But yeah, it was definitely a neat thing. But you did feel somewhat isolated in your own world, and I think everything is better being mixed. I do think it's much better being mixed now.
What other major events happened, like, while you were in high school, like world events that happened when you were in high school?
Reagan was shot. I definitely remember that day. Anwar Sadat was assassinated. I remember that day. I remember walking down the halls of school here when that happened. What else? So it was 80 to 84. Yeah, definitely. Those were two things that I definitely remember happening here. Be like, whoa, wow, that's something. The other big thing that I definitely recall happening, but I was in college, but was the space shuttle, the Challenger tragedy in 1986. Like, that was one of those things where you mark where you were at that time.
Yeah, what you talked about, how you were walking down the halls when you heard Sadat got shot. Mm-hmm. What were the general reactions to, like, the Reagan assassination and the Challenger? And
well, so when the Reagan one happened, it happened during spring break. So I remember that I wasn't in school. I just remember I was with my family. But everyone just gathered around the TV like, oh my God, the president was shot. And then that harkened back to my parents and my older siblings who remembered when JFK had been shot. And Martin Luther King had been shot. So those were, like, they talked about that. I remember having those conversations. Anwar Sadat, it was just because he was the first one. Egypt had just recognized the state of Israel, and it was kind of like that was a big thing, because there had been the '68 war, and I mean, the Middle East obviously is a difficult place, but you kind of thought that was a big deal, and I think Egypt had returned the Sinai Peninsula, or I can't remember. Egypt had returned a huge amount of land that they had taken in the earlier war to Israel, and there were a faction of Egyptians that did not like that, and it just felt like peace was like slapped in the face when that happened. I definitely remember that. Yeah. Wow.
And before we continue to college and, like, life after college and coming back to Milwaukee, do you want to take a 5-minute break so we can, like, regather here?
Yeah,
all right.
sure.
Sounds great.
Alrighty, we're back. It is 5:04, again on December 10th. and we're gonna start off with some questions about the transition from high school to college.
What was the biggest difference about going from the high school environment, like being close to home, and then going way off to college?
Obviously, living on your own. It's funny. I really missed my friends because we were very close after senior year. I mean, by senior year, you formed a pretty close bond with your friends here. And none of my close friends went to the same university that I did. And so you start off by, back then, you'd write a letter. You would actually write a letter to tell your friend, this is my phone number, so you could call. And then you'd have to get a calling card number, so it'd be cheaper, so you could call on weekends. But then, like, living on your own, autonomy, having no one telling you when to come home, no one to tell you when to study. I mean, you found out pretty quickly whether you were a responsible person or not a responsible person. Not that that's necessarily, there were some kids who fell off the track and others who just kind of reveled in being like, I'm my own seer now, I'm gonna do it. That was one of the things. It was hard though being away. So like when you came home, I definitely remember the first time I came home for my first Thanksgiving, my freshman year in college. Might have been the most fun I'd ever had because you're reunited with your friends and you hadn't seen them for 3 months. But it felt like an eternity because you had grown up a lot. Like those first 3 months of college are like 2 years of high school. Also, just like so then you see your friends who, again, you haven't seen since August. It's like the world changed, but they have different experiences. You have different experiences. And it was, and at that time, like that was, I don't want to say it was the height of the Cold War. It wasn't, but there was definitely, you became more cognizant of world events. So I remember in the 1980 Olympics when the United States boycotted the Olympics because the Russians had invaded Afghanistan. And then I remember the 84 Olympics in Los Angeles. And like the world had come back together and there was no boycott, but there was still this like rippling thing. And then when I got to college, this was all like pre-fall of the wall, but glasnost and you start seeing the Iron Curtain, or the countries behind the Iron Curtain, kind of starting to change. The world's starting to change, and it was like, wow, this is crazy. And I was a university student at the time, and it was amazing. I went to school. This is one thing it's like one of my regrets in life. But I did a semester abroad, my junior year in college in London, and it was pre-fall of the wall. And my roommates at the time, I remember they said, "You're like, hey, we're going to West Berlin this coming week. Do you want to go?" I'm like, "Oh, what are you going to do in West Berlin?" It's like, "We're going to eat and drink and do that." And I'm like, "Well, I can do that here in London, so I'm going to stay." And they went to West Berlin and they saw the wall. They saw Checkpoint Charlie. They saw and I still like, God, why didn't I go? To have experienced that, because it was only 3 years later when the world changed, and the East Germany, West Germany, and then they come together. But it was, that sort of felt like the world was opening up. Things were changing. You thought peace was going to be, forever on the horizon. So that was exciting at that time. But as a university student, then you really do start thinking even more outside of yourself. So I would say that's the biggest. When you come to high school, for me, it was you kind of started being invited to think. When you got to college, then it was like, oh, I'm thinking for bigger issues. There's stuff out there. And then then you start trying to figure out where your role is or what you want to do in life.
So it just felt like the world, like the communists were finally starting to go
the
away.
world was changing, and and the Eastern Bloc was like crumbling at the time, and you just felt like, wow, we are at the precipice of this American society, and this is all so cool. And you just thought that the world, that there will be no more problems. You kind of, I keep using the word naive, but you were naive then too, because now you can look back and realize that it didn't necessarily play out that way.
So how did you deal with this newfound, you're on your own now? Like, what did you do with your time? Like, how did you
So
fill
it's
your
funny.
hours?
I had this good classic Catholic guilt. So I felt like I had to study. Like there was some holy eye looking down on me. Somehow my parents would find out if I wasn't going to the library. And at that time, I kind of had my own plan. So I would tell you, Monday through Thursday night, I was in the library. Well, Sunday through Wednesday night, I was in the library till like midnight because I just felt like you had to be. Like that was just what you do as a college student. You have to work hard, and you do, because there's work. But going out on a Thursday night, I was never allowed as a kid to go out on school nights. Like in high school, grade school, even like seeing friends on a school night. No way. I mean. And then here I am in college, like, it's Thursday night and people are going out. I'm like, wait, I can go out? And I felt horribly guilty about it. But then you get over it. And then Fridays and Saturdays were just fun. And then it was kind of back at it Sunday. So that was my collegiate experience. So it was like work hard and then play hard. But I always had this guilt. I always felt like, oh, someone's going to find out if I do something dumb or stupid. And I was kind of just kept my nose to the grindstone.
Right.
But it's easy to fall off. And I definitely had some friends that did, because it is. There's not, especially if you went to a big university back then, didn't have a lot of a safety net. So I had friends who were in college for a long time. And I just kind of hunkered down and went through it. Yeah, but the freedom was very exciting and exhilarating, and especially when I went overseas. Then it was even more so, because then it wasn't just, now I'm in a different country, and now I can do things, I can travel to different places, and no one could say you couldn't, you were on your own. And so that, you suddenly, you grow up. Each day at that phase of your life is like 4 days. You just stepping forward.
So you talk about this drive, right? This focus to hunker down and focus on your studies, and whether that be through like a desire for preparation or this like Catholic guilt. Like what was it for ultimately? Like what did you end up doing with the hours you spent?
It's a great question. So I ended up going to law school. So I originally wanted to go to medical school, and then I changed. After I did that study abroad, then I'm like, I don't know that I want to be a doctor. So I didn't really know what I wanted to be, but law school seemed like a catch-all. And so that's how I ended up. So I never really intended to do what I've been doing for the last 34 years. So then I don't know, I did that. I do remember like the first day that I started working, it's like all that school had suddenly come to an end. It had been and then you get spit out at a conveyor belt. And I remember sitting at a desk and like, this is it. Like you're sprinting through your young years and you're learning, you're experiencing everything, and all of a sudden you're at a desk, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know that I can do this. And so you kind of have this revelation, and then you're kind of trying to figure out, well, what do I want to be? Or what do I want to make of my life? And then that's been the next 35 years after that, because it's not, at least I don't view it as that's just what you do. It's trying to figure out how you take those tools to make your life better and try to expand it. And I still want to know what I want to be when I grow up, but might be getting a little late on that.
You mentioned earlier about studying abroad in London. Like, what inspired you to study abroad?
Well, at that time, I met who is now my wife. And we were in school, and then she's like, I'm going to London next semester. And I'm like, huh? And then I'm like, well, that sounds kind of cool. And I had 2 older siblings that had studied abroad, and but they went to places where you had to learn a different language. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, England seems pretty easy. At least I think I have a proficiency in English. Yeah. And so, and then I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. So it wasn't like this. I didn't expect it to be the life-changing event that it was. But I also, what was really kind of neat too, is that I saw London at a time which was, they were 40 years removed from World War II. Mm-hmm. And now I'm 40 years removed from that experience, which freaks me out because it doesn't seem like that long ago. And then I'm like, because I remember talking with people, I had teachers who were like, they had lived through the Blitz in London. And I'm like, what? Like, that's insane. Mm-hmm. And now I realize, oh, that same time passage has gotten me here. And it's kind of wild. But it was very eye-opening. And then you realize that when you go to different countries, that there's a whole world that exists outside. So I started at this little place in Elm Grove, and then I came to Marquette, and then you come to Milwaukee, and then you go to these bigger places. Then I ended up coming back to Milwaukee, which I've loved. I really have. It's been great because this is a home, it's a place that's comfortable for all of its positives and negatives that Milwaukee has. It's still the positives outweigh the negatives. And I would say that we've been very lucky, and I think you guys have been lucky. You guys have led lives that have been pretty blessed in some ways.
Absolutely.
And so it's nice. And this is a city that you can make a difference. It's not, you don't get lost in the numbers. It's a city you can afford to, generally live in a place. I mean, if you're working, it's not a crazy expensive city. And I always love when people come to Milwaukee. And this is almost universal. People come here who've never been here, and they're like, okay, I was not expecting that.
Right.
I mean, it is generally like, I thought Milwaukee was like a bedroom community to Chicago, and I'm like, no, I actually kind of like it that way, because if word got out totally, I mean, this place might blow up.
Yeah.
But it's really like, I love that when people come here like, I did not know that was there. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of neat when you travel and then you come back, and then, because a lot of times we take so much of this city for granted. And then you travel and then you come back here, oh, yeah, this is actually pretty nice. Like, that's beautiful. And I still, like, my commute is, I go along the lakefront every day. And you just never get tired of that. It's just this, 1/5 of the world's fresh water is sitting right out there. Who knows, maybe over the next 20 years, things that might change.
Yeah.
Because of that. But, we're pretty lucky.
So you basically just answered this question, but after college, what inspired you to come back to Milwaukee instead of going other places like the coast, and how the city changed from when you really last saw it?
So the main reason I came back is Wisconsin. If you went to law school in Wisconsin, and I went to University of Wisconsin, you didn't have to take the bar exam. And by that time, I was like, I'm tired of school. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I don't have to take a bar exam, so I'll look for a job in Milwaukee. And so that's what brought me back here. It's kind of crazy. Back then it was only Wisconsin and Louisiana that didn't require bar exams. And whenever you lump yourself in with Louisiana, like, something's wrong. so now we're still the only state that has that. So that's what brought me back. But it's been great. And to me, like living downtown, I'd never lived, in an apartment building like that. I thought that was really cool. I walked to work. I'm like, oh, this is really neat. I sort of felt cosmopolitan, and I'd never felt cosmopolitan growing up here, even though it wasn't. Again, you're young, you don't know, but you just that's how I felt. And but it was very rewarding, and you could make a career here pretty quickly, and so that was a nice thing. And then I realized, once kids came and all that, this is a really nice place to be. Mm-hmm. And we kind of replicated our life in some ways, sending kids to Catholic schools, and their life is played out in some ways like ours. But no grand plans. I didn't have any aspirations like, I'm coming back to Milwaukee.
Right.
I was lazy.
It just worked out that way too.
Yeah, laziness has gotten me to a lot of places.
What did you and Aunt Beth do when you really moved back into the city, into the apartment?
So we moved into an apartment. My brother lived above us, and he told us there's an apartment below, and so that's how we got the apartment. I started working as a lawyer. My Aunt Beth, my wife, was working as a social worker, and she worked at nights, and I worked during the day, and so we waited till weekends to kind of get together. We had one car. I'd walk to work. She'd take the car, and then so we were there and kind of living. That was a fun part of life because you were making a little bit of money, but you didn't have a whole lot of responsibility because we didn't have kids yet, and so that was the world was your oyster for some. It was just it was fun. And then you get together and. We were starting to make. I definitely remember though when I moved back here, and my first night before I started working, I realized I moved into an apartment. I owned nothing. I had no TV. I had a mattress, and I had no silverware. I was like, how I had my clothing in suitcases and a mattress, and I didn't have, my friends weren't here. I didn't know anybody, and I remember what do I do? It was so weird. So I just got in the car and I drove out to my parents' house, and I stole some silverware. But
naturally.
Yeah. Not a lot. Not that they would notice. Enough that they wouldn't notice. But So that was, and then 5 years, and then we had a baby and we left the apartment. And what did we do? But your mom and dad, Leo, needed a place. And we're like, hey, they moved into our apartment, which was great because we had moved a couch in that we couldn't get out, and so they got the couch too, and they were there for 5 years in the exact same apartment. Yeah, so that's kind of funny.
And then we sold it to our good friends, Jonathan Koenig, which is kind of funny.
So they have the couch now.
Oh yeah. Well, and then they moved out into a different house, so who knows who owns it now? But I think we might have brought that couch home.
Really?
Actually. Yeah.
Really?
Yep. But it's been long gone now.
Yeah.
But you saw the city change in front of your eyes. By the time you were living there, the city was starting to fully develop itself as an American city. It was getting away from industrialization and manufacturing, now becoming more.
Yeah.
It's weird to say corporate, but it's true.
No, but it definitely was. I mean, it was. Yeah, so many of my friends were engineers, industrial engineers, mechanical engineers, and it was a city that was built on machines and building, and amazingly so. And the lawyers that I knew were people who did the patent work for a lot of those companies. But it just started changing. The whole vibe started changing. When we moved back too, we started popping up in the news, the Dahmer trial was happening right after we moved back here, and not for good reasons, but you'd see a building pop up here and that, and more bands starting to tour through, and oh, this place is starting to get a little bit of a vibe. Never feeling that it was on the national radar, but now you definitely I get the sense that, and I like this, I think Milwaukee is this hidden secret that's not so hidden anymore. And it's just kind of percolating along. And I think that what used to kill us was our proximity to Chicago, because everything went to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Now I actually think that our proximity to Chicago is an advantage, and you see so many more people moving up here and being able to move back and forth between the cities, and this has become a huge area. And I think fresh water is going to be part of our future. Definitely. I mean, when you think about the climate and where we are, we don't have earthquakes. We don't have, raging fires. We don't have mudslides.
Right.
We have a lot of fresh
Fortunate,
water. Yeah, it's no hurricanes. We have tough winters, but this is kind of in a sweet spot. And then when you sort of look at the greater Midwest, I would get angry at people from the coast who would refer to the Midwest as flyover country. I remember having a professor when I was in London. Oh, the United States is East Coast and the West Coast, with Chicago in the middle, which that's just not the case. And you come here, you realize what an ethnically vibrant city Milwaukee is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing that people come here like, I didn't realize the neighborhoods that you have here and the ethnic background that is here that's still kind of cherished. And I dig that. I really do.
Yeah, and the ethnic heritage is celebrated in so many different ways. One of those being music, and you mentioned like bands earlier, and looking at the advent of places like Summerfest. Like, were there any like major concerts or events or like bands that you went to see that you really loved?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I guess that's always one of my questions that I ask friends. What was the first concert you ever saw? The first concert I ever saw was at Summerfest, and I saw John Denver. Playing at the main stage, and then like 2 days later, I saw Willie Nelson. I wasn't even like
really?
a Willie Nelson, but I was like and then your own musical tastes go through, and you see bands. The quality of bands that have played here, from Peter Gabriel, Genesis, U2. You see. I do remember when I was in high school, there was. The Who was a band that was coming through here, and they were going to bypass Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And there was a DJ who was like, I'm going to stay out on the. He lived on a street, on a billboard, like protesting until the Who played in Milwaukee. And the Who actually played in Milwaukee, and our he's like, the Who is coming to Milwaukee. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. But, yeah, there have been. To me, it was just more the eclectic nature of the bands coming here. But also, as you get older, you realize the depth of culture that we have here between theater and music, performing arts. It's really astonishing. We are a city that punches way above its weight in that regard. That's really kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like going back to saying like how we're kind of referred to as like an annex of Chicago, like the little brother. Like geographically, like we should have been like the bigger city, because first of all, we're higher up on the lake. It's a little more convenient, and we have like a big bay too. But alas, didn't happen.
Those confounded railroads.
Oh
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
It's over.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. No, I mean, it is interesting, because you guys are in the class, but the origin of the city, I mean, when people were coming to this part of the country by boat, this stop was earlier than Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Getting off here, the natural resources were here. It's in like a natural harbor out there. But yeah, the trains are what turned it all around. And like I said, I mean, you can say that Chicago is, I mean, it's a behemoth. It's a global city. But I think we can benefit from that. I think we suffered from it in some ways, but I think we can definitely benefit from it. But it's funny, when I go overseas, or if I travel, and people in foreign countries, where are you from? You say Milwaukee, and you don't always get. Sometimes you say, oh, the Milwaukee Bucks, like they know that, or the Green Bay Packers, but they don't know where Green Bay is. I just end up saying Chicago, like, oh, Chicago.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like a minute of film left on this. Whatever. we'll just get one question, then change
Right.
the card. So you lived in the apartment, and then you mentioned like a while ago you moved to Whitefish Bay after that. What prompted that choice? Was it like kids?
It was kids, just having a little more space. That was the one thing, and so we kind of looked in other places. We went a different way. So back growing up, and it's still somewhat this way, but I still get it. Growing up on the west side, moving to the east side, which we call that the east side, even though it's not even east. It's north,
Right.
Right, but moving over there. And I remember like growing up too, I didn't really, I mean, there were kids from Whitefish Bay that went here, but I didn't hang out over there. And if I went over there, I'm like, I don't like it over here. East Siders. And, but it was the building stock, the houses, the walkability of the neighborhoods. That was really one of the things. And so when we started looking, we looked in like Wauwatosa, the older part of Wauwatosa, Shorewood, and Whitefish Bay. And then whatever landed was going to land for us.
Right.
And then we got a house there in Whitefish Bay. And then we kind of outgrew that. And we almost bought a house in the Washington Highlands, which when I think about, we didn't get because we couldn't have, our offer was turned down. How different our life would have been. Because none of the kids would have gone to school over there. None of the people that are our friends would have been our friends. We would have gone to a different parish. And we ended up moving up to Fox Point. And yeah, it's funny how life plays itself out in ways. But I do love.
So you mentioned you live now in Fox Point. How's that treating you so far?
It's been really nice. It's been really nice. But now, this is the interesting thing. Now all of our kids are gone, or almost all gone. And now we're thinking about what's the next step. And we're part of those people that want to come back to the city. It would be really nice to live back downtown again. And 2 of our 4 kids live downtown. And that's nice. It's nice that the next generation, some of my generation, Milwaukee was a place to leave. They went to broader horizons, and over the years, some of those people have come back. But now, with my kids and their peers, so many chose to live here and are staying here. But so now we're part of this second wave of people who, now that when the kids are gone, like, well, let's go back to the city.
And now that you're like talking about people coming back to Milwaukee in like the last 25-ish years, there's almost been like a revival, like a renaissance, especially like downtown. Like you see buildings like the Northwestern Mutual building coming up, the Couture coming up, the Calatrava being built in the lakefront. What are your thoughts like on that, and like how Milwaukee could finally like step on the world stage here?
Milwaukee has the bones to be an unbelievable city. The waterways, the railways, if we could improve our mass transit, I mean, it would, honestly, it is. I look at the city and I think it is prime for, the Inner Harbor is unbelievable.
Oh yeah, you hear they want to like develop like a second downtown there almost.
It would be, I mean, the thing is you need people to be there, but we are blessed, and there's already a grid, old rail lines working their way through. We have a tight city grid. We're densely packed, which is good from a development standpoint. I think Milwaukee's best days are still ahead of it. Mm-hmm. I really think that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's all like we have today. So thank you for letting us interview you. We're just very thankful. And it is 5:34, Tuesday, December 10th, and we'll wrap it up there.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.